Hi. I've always loved the Spider-Man character my whole life. And I've also always loved going to the movie theater and living and experiencing cinema. So it makes sense that one of my fondest memories is of when my dad took me to watch my first Spider-Man movie in the theater. I was absolutely buzzing. Because I was always too young to go watch the Raimi movies in the theaters, but I was finally old enough to go and watch my first Spider-Man movie in 2012, The Amazing Spider-Man. And honestly, as a kid, I loved it. I thought it was just the coolest movie I'd ever seen. I was blown away by the whole thing as a kid, but as I grew older and became a cynical teenager who only wanted his superhero movies one way, that way wasn't The Amazing Spider-Man. Everyone told me that these were bad movies and that Homecoming was the superior Spider-Man, and I wanted to fit in, so I did. I just decided I didn't like these movies anymore, and that's sad and not fair. Not fair to that kid that I once was, because even to this day, I consider Andrew Garfield my Spider-Man, the best Spider-Man. But is it a good movie? Was my childhood joy deserved, or was the older, stupid, cynical teenager I was just a few years ago right all along? Today I want to find out, so I rewatched The Amazing Spider-Man for the first time in probably a decade now, and well, this is my defense of The Amazing Spider-Man.
Hey everybody!
We're going to take questions at the end.
So I'm sorry, do you mind if can I say one thing? So thanks for having me. You have no idea how much this means to me. I've always wanted to come here as a fan, and this is my first time, so here I am as a fan. I just want to say a couple of things. I'm Andrew Garfield, and I'm going to be here introducing this panel, this Amazing Spider-Man panel. Stan Lee says that the reason why Spidey is so popular is because all of us can relate to him, and I agree. I needed Spidey in my life when I was a kid, and he gave me hope. In every comic I read, he was living out mine and every skinny boy's fantasy.
The Amazing Spider-Man released on July 3rd, 2012, directed by Mark Webb in his second ever film, which is crazy, starring young Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone. It had an interesting development history that I'm not going to touch on too much here, but I do think that it had something to do with the lack of excitement some people had for this movie. Think about it, all three of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies destroyed at the box office, with Spider-Man 3 amassing more than $830 million at the global box office, which would be crazy now, let alone in 2007. And only 5 years later, they were bringing out a full-fledged reboot, even though the date had already been set for Raimi's Spider-Man 4 with a release date of May 5th, 2011, barely a year before The Amazing Spider-Man released. So yeah, it makes sense that some people had a sour taste in their mouth coming into this one, and I can't blame them, but personally, I didn't even know about a Spider-Man 4 when I was a kid. I just thought superheroes got a few movies then rebooted, and this was just another reboot to me. So in this video, I won't be holding that against this movie, because that's not fair. And honestly, for like the first 20 minutes, I'm not gonna hold much of anything against this movie. Genuinely, the first half hour of this film is amazing. And honestly, I don't understand how you can dislike the beginning of this movie. It's literally the same as the 2002 Spider-Man, or at least really similar, which is why I don't actually mind the storyline with Peter's dad in this movie, at least this movie, because yeah, this is a kid who never knew his father, and yeah, that would affect him, and that would also affect Uncle Ben, who was his father for his whole life, but Peter doesn't see it that way, and I love that, because that hits on so many levels. So yeah, for the most part, I'm fine with it. We also get introduced pretty quickly and pretty effectively to who this Peter Parker is. He's taking pictures. He has a skateboard this time. I don't know, 2012 was the time, dude. But he's awkward, and anyone who tells you Andrew Garfield wasn't a good Peter Parker wasn't paying attention to this movie. We also get the best Flash Thompson out of any of these movies, which I mean isn't a high bar, but still, later in this movie we get my favorite Flash moment maybe ever. We also get my favorite Aunt May and Uncle Ben in this movie. Yeah, I said it. Like, I don't get how we're 20 minutes in and this is a great Spider-Man movie. Kind of a remix of the first Raimi movie, but that's a good movie, so it works. And even then, we get new stuff here when Peter finds his dad's briefcase, and he has a great moment with Ben, which ties Peter into Dr. Curtis Connors pretty perfectly. I also really like the early interactions between Peter and Gwen in this movie. It's, dare I say, perfect again. That's just because we have two amazing actors with great chemistry here. We buy that no, Peter is not getting the girl here. Gwen likes Peter and is obviously in control, and when he asks her out later, she was obviously going to say yes because she liked him first. This is gross. I hate it. Just stop. And after this is the scene where Peter uses his powers for the first time in the subway, and yeah, this isn't great. The editing choices are stylistic at best and just straight up hard to follow at worst. There's some level of redemption in this scene though because of how charismatic Andrew Garfield plays this whole situation, but other than that, this just doesn't work for me. But they do make up for it with his next discovering his power scene where he isn't quite used to his new strength yet. I really like this, and it's kind of surprising that we never saw too much of this from our other Spider-Men. And this does lead directly into another scene that I'm not too fond of personally. I don't love any of the stuff with Peter one-upping Flash here. I don't know, it just doesn't work for me, and it's a little silly. Like, someone told me this was Spider-Man's Batman Begins. I don't know, it doesn't feel like that. But it does set up a string of events that I hate a lot. Peter irresponsibly uses his abilities, which causes Uncle Ben to have to swap shifts, which means Peter has to pick up Aunt May. But instead, Peter tests out his powers more, whilst Coldplay is playing. 2012, man. And then he goes and talks to his mentor / only connection to his father, Curtis Connors, and completely forgets to pick up his aunt. Responsibility. Then he gets into an argument with Ben, where Ben says this.
He believed that if you could do good things for other people, you had a moral obligation to do those things. That's what's at stake here. Not choice, responsibility.
And Peter leaves. Ben goes looking for him and by moral obligation jumps on the grenade, or in this case, the gun, which by the way is Peter's fault by lack of responsibility with great power. I love all of this. I hate it, but I love it all. A lot of people say we didn't need to see Uncle Ben die because it had only been 10 years, but this was my first Uncle Ben death, really. You know, I wasn't even born yet in 2002, so I feel like it kind of works here, and it's also just delivered really well. And also, you really grow to like this version of Uncle Ben, or at least I did, and this, it hurts just so much. Next up, we get Spider-Man, or Peter, working out of vengeance, I guess. He's hunting down the man that killed his uncle in probably the ugliest adaptation of a homemade Spider-Man suit possible. This is just bad, dude. I get it, I do, but bad. The real suit is good though, and I stand by that. It's a really good looking suit from most angles, and it's really just the mask that doesn't work for me at all. And I do like how Peter toys with these guys. He's still misunderstanding what Ben told him, because this is not what his moral obligation entails, but he has that great power and he's abusing it in a lot of ways. Also, I love Captain Stacy in this movie. The dinner scene is amazing, awkwardly amazing and tense, and I love what Peter has to say here, and I love what Captain Stacy says, and it works a lot. These two viewpoints that neither guy is really wrong, but neither guy is really right. Also, did I mention I just love Peter and Gwen's chemistry? This is just something else. There's also storylines with the guy from Jurassic World, and also all the lizard stuff, and honestly, I don't love either of these stories, and one of them barely gets resolved and is only really resolved if you think about it a lot. Same thing with Peter's vengeance stuff. He just kind of moves on, which I actually really like, especially after such an impactful scene like that bridge sequence. Let's talk about it. There are whole videos about this amazing sequence, which makes sense because it's great. You know, Peter becomes Spider-Man here, literally.
Who are you? Spider-Man.
You know, I love the symbolism when Peter risks his identity to help this kid feel safe because, yeah, that's what Spider-Man would do. And then he uses that mask to empower the kid and make him feel strong enough to get out of this. And that's his moral obligation, because with great power, well, you get it. Is that good? I'm not making a whole video on just the bridge. I could, I'm not, but I love it. There's even more to dissect here, but we're not going to get into that in this video. Also, I guess we should talk about the lizard now. His design is cool. Genuinely, I do like like it. I do wish he kept the lab coat on like he has in this brief scene, but I get it. It's 2012. That's too goofy. We're not there yet. But then again, they didn't give him the lab coat in No Way Home either, so when will we be there? Because I'm ready for it. His design is about the only thing I love, though. His plan is silly, but I do think it's a decent enough idea, and I do love that Peter is somewhat responsible in a way for all of this. Something about that moral obligation, you know? It feels to be shining through here, too. Ifans does a really great job in the role, and I love Connors in this movie, but I do feel like a little bit of that depth is lost once he becomes a giant green reptile. Also, once his big Act 3 set piece ends with a giant blue sky beam. These were already getting old in 2012, but we still have to deal with them for like another 4 years after this movie for some reason. Whose idea was this? I like this. This is cool. Also, the fight between Lizard and Spider-Man here is just really good. I actually think all of the interactions between Lizard and Spider-Man are good in this movie, especially for being so CGI heavy in 2012. That $230 million budget is shining. And that's one thing I do think these Amazing Spider-Man movies have over all of the other Spidey movies, and that's just the fun action set pieces. These are easily some of the best fight scenes in any Spider-Man movies, and I stand by that. Peter and Gwen are still amazing, and I love them. Hopefully nobody falls in the sequel. This fight in the school is the best one in the movie. I love it. Lizard fights like a reptile somehow, and these are the most Spider-Man-like movements in this movie. It is just done so well with so much care. There are people out there that think this is just a cash grab of a reboot. This scene alone shows you that's not true. Also, I don't love seeing Spider-Man fight the police, but also this makes sense and is kind of needed in a movie where for multiple nights, Spider-Man was a Batman-level vigilante, which is something else I don't love, but it happened. Also, really enjoy that Gwen gets involved here in the finale. That's great. And also, this leads to a Lizard jump scare. That's cool, I guess. Okay, I'll admit it. As much as I love this scene, this sequence, it looks beautiful. This is unearned. Like, why? Why is New York automatically rallying with him? I don't know. I don't, but I love it. This is so Spider-Man, and yeah, the Raimi movie did it first, and also better. But this is still so cool and beautiful. I love it a lot. It just looks so good. This is a good-looking movie, man. It's dark, I mean, but it's 2012, and The Dark Knight Rises just came out, so it makes sense. And also, that whole final fight between Spider-Man and Lizard has surprisingly great CGI. Like, for the most part, this holds up and looks better than some of the superhero schlock we accept these days. We also get Captain Stacy finally realizing that Spider-Man is the good guy here and that he's trying to do the right thing, and then he dies. But not before rightfully asking Peter to stay away from Gwen. Especially with her speech earlier in the movie to him, it kind of makes you feel sorry for her in a way, especially with what happens in the next movie. It kind of makes that whole thing feel inevitable, which is heartbreaking. And speaking of heartbreaking, did I mention that this is my favorite Aunt May? I love her.
Peter Parker, if there's one thing you are, it's good. Anyone has a problem with that can talk to me.
And this breakup, it's tough. Even if it doesn't last for the remaining like 5 minutes of the movie and there are no consequences to it, it's still tough because these actors sell it. They shouldn't sell it. Like, this shouldn't work, but they sell it. I also love how this movie ends with Ben's voicemail and that final triumphant swing. Why is it dark though? Why is it nighttime? Come on, this is Spider-Man, not Batman. Please. I'm glad they learned their lesson in the next one, and I do forgive them because this shot is beautiful and I love it. Also, remember the post-credit scene of this movie? Because I don't. It's okay though, it's just Peter's dad stuff, I think. I don't know. Who cares really? Because hopefully that doesn't have a bigger part in the next one. Oh boy. So yeah, I actually really enjoy this movie. You know, looking back, I think I was wrong. I think a lot of people are wrong about this movie. That cynical, moody teenager I once was that wanted his superhero movies to all fit in with how everybody else wanted them. Which, looking back, those movies aren't the best, but neither is this movie. It's not perfect, but I love it. You know, looking back, I really enjoy it, and I hope that you also, looking back at it, don't think it's so bad. I think it gets a really bad rep because, yeah, it's too dark, and yeah, some of the choices are ones that shouldn't ever be made in a Spider-Man movie, but also it's beautiful and has a really good story in there with people that you can tell who really cared about these characters. And also, yeah, it is kind of just Sam Raimi's 2002 Spider-Man movie. If he was a little too inspired by The Dark Knight while making it, okay, just a little bit. I still don't love that comparison, but it's alright. I genuinely say that I had a good time rewatching this movie, and I would recommend giving it another shot, especially if you were like me. It was just kind of going with what everyone else said, because I genuinely think we got this one wrong. It's a nice 74%, and now I want to recommend each and every one of you come back back to this channel, this time next Sunday, because I'm gonna be defending the indefendable. You've probably been thinking about it. I've been really nice to this movie, and yeah, it's happening. Next week, I'm going to be giving my defense of The Amazing Spider-Man 2. For fans of that movie, or for people who just want to see how I'm going to defend it, I rewatched it, and I have thoughts. That's all I'm gonna say. Just be here next week. But that's about it. Bye.